Hello, podcast listeners. So, in case you have not heard, the Unashamedly You conference is back and it's going to be here September 23rd for everyone, with a special meet and greet on September 22nd for our inner circle ticket holders to get some one on one time with our speakers and guests. We are making the current Share to Social giveaway a ticket for you and a plus one to come to the conference for free. All you have to do is share a podcast that you're listening to and tag us on our Instagram handle, unashamedly.you, for a chance to win. We cannot wait to announce our winners. Hello and welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast, a space to enlighten, encourage, and empower you to go out and unashamedly be who God is calling you to be. I am your host, Jamie Herndon. I pray you hear less of me and more of Him as you listen to today's episode. Let's grow together. Hello, friends. Today is such a special day. I cannot wait to announce the guest speaker that we have. She is going to be sharing her story, and I know so many of you in this community have even prayed prayers over her for the past few years. She has been such an inspiration to so many. And Medley, we could not be more thankful that you've agreed to come on here and share your story of God's grace and mercy with us. Introduce yourself to our listeners and welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast.
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much. I always feel so honored, and I don't ever take anything lightly. And so I appreciate so much you believing in me and asking me. I'm so grateful for that. I was born and raised in Mississippi. I was born into a minister's home, and that's always been a big part of my life. I'm the oldest of three, and about 13 years ago, we moved to South Louisiana, just south of Baton Rouge, and my dad began pastoring a church. So for the last 13 years, I've been a pastor's daughter. Ever since I was little, I had just this desire to be in the medical field and to be a nurse. And from the time I was 7 years old, that is what I wanted. And that passion and that desire, it never went away. And I'm so grateful because a lot of times we grow up and we go to college and we struggle to find our purpose and our calling. And that's okay. Those are all normal feelings. I was just one of those people that knew from a very young age what career path I wanted. And all through high school, got to college, like it was still exactly what I wanted and what I felt like God was leading me into. So I went to nursing school in Southeastern Louisiana University, and I graduated in December of 2017. And I started working at a women's hospital here in Baton Rouge, and I loved it. I really felt like God just gave me that passion and that desire to take care of people. And that fits so perfectly with my life as a minister's kid and then a preacher's kid and a pastor's kid, because in a spiritual way, I grew up and watched my parents always take care of people in a physical way, cooking for them and being there for their kids and all these different things, and in a spiritual way. And so it just made sense because that's all I had ever known was helping people and reaching for people and being there when they needed you. And so it just fits so perfectly. And it's a very hard job. It's a very stressful job, but it was a very rewarding job. And I think because I felt so sure that was my calling from the Lord as far as my career, I just, even on the hardest of days and those super hard shifts where you come home and you're like, whew, I don't know, maybe this isn't it. But even through all of that, I always had such peace that God had called me to that. And He gave me so many opportunities to share about Him and to testify and to pray for patients in those really difficult moments. A lot of the patients I cared for were cancer patients, and a lot of hard situations, a lot of hard stories. And I'm so grateful for that. And somewhere along the way, I met my husband and we fell in love, and he moved away. He moved about 4 hours away to go to medical school. And so most of our relationship was long distance. And we eventually got married. It was an extremely busy time. He took his board exam 5 days before we got married. I was working full time. I was working nights. It was a really crazy time, but we got married in June of 2019. And, it was our own little fairy tale. What a love story. The doctor and the nurse, we both had so many plans and things that we wanted to do. And we had so many ideas of how we could kind of merge the medical community and the church. We had so many ideas. My husband didn't grow up in a minister's home, but he always grew up working in the church. And he had such a desire to work in the church and work for God's kingdom. And he saw his career as a way to benefit the church and to merge the two together. So that's our little love story.
I love that. We all have a story in our minds as a child. Like you said, you were 7 years old and you knew what you wanted to do and what you wanted to be when you grow up. And I feel kind of like we all have somewhat of a thought of how our lives are going to go and exactly what's going to happen throughout our lives and our fairy tales. But life as we know it is very unpredictable. And your life has shown the same. Your story is one that could have never been predicted, but it does show the mercy and the hand of God through it. And that is one thing that I love, that you are sharing and showing that God's mercy and his hand can be on your life through every situation. So share with us a little bit of your story after you got married.
Yeah, it was a wild time. It was really stressful. It's a really stressful time. I don't recommend, but if anybody's in medical school, there's just really tight windows. And so you kind of have to do things that way. But yeah, we got married. It was a beautiful wedding. We went on our honeymoon. We came home. He immediately drove back to Shreveport. That's where he was in school. I stayed in the town that we're from, in the Baton Rouge area, and I finished packing and I went up a couple days later. And our plan was, I was going to kind of get the house settled and get things unpacked because, like I said, he was right back into school, like full blown clinicals, 10-hour days at the hospital, studying when he came home because they were still having to take exams and stuff in between all of that. So our plan was that I was going to kind of unpack the house, get everything set up, and I was going to start looking for a job up there in Shreveport because I had worked until the very last minute that I could at my job here in Baton Rouge. And I was honestly really sad to leave my job. I was really sad to leave my family. It was actually a difficult transition for me because I was so close to my family and so close to my church. And I was excited to be married and I was excited to be with Kevin, but it was a very bittersweet time for me. I cried a lot of tears. And that, just a side note, that's okay. You can be happy and sad at the same time. Both things can exist. I feel like that's something that's not talked about when you're going into marriage. If you're really close to your family and you're moving away, that's really, really hard. And it's okay to be sad and happy at the same time. So we were going through all these transitions. We were newly married, fresh home from our honeymoon, and he is like right back into school. And if you know anything about medical school, it is all consuming. They literally have no time. I was brand new in the city. I didn't know my way around. I only knew a couple of people. So that was our plan. So about a week and a half later, it would be about 3 weeks after our wedding. Our honeymoon was about 10 days. And then, so about a week and a half after that, we were renting a house and there was gas to the house. And we had been living in the house for about a week and a half without any gas. So cold showers, no stove, no lots of different things. But we finally got our gas turned on. And I was home by myself when the guy came, and because Kevin was at the hospital, he was at school, and Kevin came home, and then we went out, we ran some errands, we did some things, and we came back later that night, and we kind of knew there was a problem. things just didn't seem right, kind of hard to explain. And Kevin was trying to figure out what the problem was because we knew that the gas technician had been that day and had turned on the gas. And there's a lot of little things that happened, but to suffice it, there was an explosion. Basically, our rental house was full of gas. And so there was something that sparked and it just exploded and fire went all through our rental house. And we were in different parts of the house. So that's really probably the main reason that Kevin and I were burned very differently, is because we were in different parts of the house. And Kevin was able to get out of the house faster than I was. It's a miracle that I even made it out of the house. There's so many miracles in this horrible situation. There were so many miracles that happened, and it would take hours to name them all. But God had so many things perfectly lined out that day. You can look back and we can see the hand of God, and that He still had us. So the explosion happened. We were in the backyard. There was a off-duty police officer who was driving by our house right as our house exploded. So his wife called 911. He came to the backyard. He knocked down the fence to get to us, all these things. And I just remember I'm laying on the ground, and it's a really weird place to come to this moment where all of a sudden everything is crystal clear, and you realize that you're actively dying. I cannot explain the feeling. It's so hard to put into words, but I was laying in the backyard having trouble breathing, and I knew that I was dying. I knew that I was. And I had the weirdest peace. I can't even explain it, but I wasn't scared. It was such a weird dichotomy of things happening. It almost didn't even feel real, but I remember seeing this man in the backyard, and he stayed a distance away. And I remember just watching him. He just knelt down, and he just stayed kneeled down the whole time. Paramedics came, fire trucks came, all this stuff. And what's crazy is I'm a nurse, right? So even throughout all of this craziness that's going on, I'm laying in the backyard, but I'm laying on the ground, and I know that I'm dying because I'm a nurse. And so I know how bad it is to be burned, and like burn patients' chances of survival. Like, I had all this knowledge from nursing school. I knew that this was a bad situation, and I knew that I was dying because I knew, if the paramedics don't get here within just a few minutes, like I'm not going to live. It's a really weird thing to know in your mind that you're dying, to have peace, and also be running through like medical knowledge in your head. It was really bizarre. But obviously, everybody came. The emergency personnel came. We got to the hospital. After getting in the ambulance and getting some medicine and stuff like that, I went to sleep. They put me to sleep, and I was basically in a coma for about 2 weeks. They kept me under because of the just severity, the amount of pain. I would not have been able to handle it, so they keep those big burn patients basically in a coma. So there's about 2 weeks that I really don't remember much. Being in a coma is also weird, and I could talk about that for a long time. You're not as out of it as people think that you are. I remember things from that time that in the moment it felt like a dream, but later on I realized was actually reality. So there are things that I remember. And the hospitalization process was a long, long process, and it was awful. It was a horrible time. I was in the hospital for about just under 6 months. Was in the ICU for about 90 days. That was incredibly hard because nobody could stay with me. Because it's the ICU, they only had, typical ICUs have their visiting hours. And so my family and friends and Kevin, they could only come during visiting hours. That was really, really hard. So to summarize, I was burned 96% of my body, second and third degree, but mostly third degree. I had about 27 surgeries in that span of 5.5, 6 months. And I can't even put into words the amount of pain that I felt during that time, just the torment and so many things. Kevin was burned about 35%, second and third degree, mostly second. And he had multiple surgeries and he was hospitalized for about a month. So, what a way to start off our marriage. It was really tough. Fast forward when I went from the hospital to a rehab hospital. And when I got out of the rehab hospital, we moved in with my parents because my care was so excruciating and so much. There's no way one person could do it on their own. I had open wounds. We had to do wound care every day. It was an excruciating process. And that went on for months. And then I started physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy. And I was in all of those therapies for about 2 years. Countless doctor's appointments. I mean, so many things that physically that we've been through. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of the psychological and the emotional side of things. It's very hard from a marriage aspect to go from married to honeymoon to setting up your house to in the hospital. Kevin's like, I'm in the hospital, I'm burned, I'm having surgeries, and I don't know if my wife is going to live. And he has his own story, his own perspective of everything that happened. And although physically this has been so much harder on me, I would say in some ways, emotionally and psychologically, it's been harder on him. That survivor's guilt is a real thing, and so many other things. But, God is faithful. We could have never written this story. It's really unimaginable. Up until this happened to us, I can honestly say I had never really heard stories about burn survivors, like burn victims and traumatic things that people have gone through. We learned briefly about burns in nursing school, but we didn't even learn about it extensively because it's just not super common. It's not like heart disease. So obviously post our accident, I've learned so many stories of burn survivors and so many incredible stories that are out there. But walking through this season was so hard and it was so isolating because it's not easy to find somebody that has been through something that's even remotely similar, especially for us, not 3 weeks after we got married. The sky was the limit. Kevin and I are both dreamers and planners, and we had so many dreams and plans that we felt like, God had given us. And to just, when you're in that season, to watch all of that just go away, you just feel like God, I have nothing left. Aside from all the questions that you ask, of course, like, why did this happen? Why did you allow this? All the whys, there's so many questions and battles and things that you go through spiritually and psychologically and all the PTSD and just all the things. And then it's so hard on your marriage when you go through such unexpected, not just Kevin and I, but anybody, you go through some horrible, unexpected trial. You have to learn, how do you process, how do you grieve, how do you move forward, how do you reconnect, how do you grow. And it was a very hard season, and sometimes it still is. We're constantly still recovering. We're so much better and God has brought us so far, but there's still days we wake up and the situation is really hard. There's so many things that, because I had partial amputations on all 10 of my fingers, that has made life so hard and it has made life so challenging. And there are so many things that I am physically unable to do. With all the therapy, with all the things, with all the prosthetics, there are things I am unable to do. And right now, it just seems like those things will always be that way. And so that's an adjustment for me. That's an adjustment for Kevin. We were both extremely independent people. We're both extremely stubborn. We're both extremely hard-headed. And then you put us in a situation like this, and it was extremely hard on us in different ways. I was totally dependent. I mean, for months and months and months, totally dependent on other people for everything. Even when I came home from the hospital, I could walk around a little bit unassisted, but I was mostly in a wheelchair. And I mean, I had to have help to stand up, to sit down, to lay down, to sit up. They had to feed me. Even after I came home from the hospital, I couldn't feed myself because my hands were so bandaged. I couldn't hardly move my arms. There's just so many things. And that seemed like such a dark, it seemed like such a dark hole. Like if people have been through, severe anxiety and depression, and it just feels like a dark hole that you can't climb out of. That's what it felt like, to be such an independent person and then have everything stripped away from you in just in a moment's time. It was so hard. And, when you're in those moments, it's really hard to think to yourself, God's going to use this. He always will. He's going to. But when you're in that moment, when you're in that season, it's really hard to sit there and think, even though I can't feed myself, even though I can't take myself to the bathroom, God's going to use this. It's really hard to think that. But if you can just quote scriptures and just when you don't know what to say, when you don't know what to pray, when you're in such a hard place that you just, nothing seems right, nothing seems, you don't even know what to say. In those moments, you don't know what to pray. I quoted so many scriptures that my family, Kevin, they quoted scriptures over me. They encouraged me. And even if I didn't receive it well, because there were times that I'll be honest, I didn't receive it well because I really didn't want to hear it because I was so angry and I was so mad and I was so discouraged. But at the same time, I needed to hear it. Even if it made me mad, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear, I needed to hear it. And they're the only reason that I made it. My family and all the people all over the country and the world that were praying for us. And of course, Kevin, that's the only reason that I made it through that. And the Lord, of course, the Lord's the one that brought us through. He's the one that saved my life. I shouldn't even be here. 96% burns, that doesn't happen very often. And if it does, they usually don't live. So it's a miracle that I'm here. So God obviously had a purpose and he had a reason. And so for anybody that's going through a hard time, I know it seems impossible, but I'm telling you that God has a reason for it. And even if it seems impossible, our situation seemed impossible. How could any good come out of anything that happened? And we could have never dreamed, literally, we could have never dreamed that God would give us a platform on social media, of all places, of all things that God used. God used social media in a powerful way to spread our story. And eventually, as I slowly was recovering and slowly working through that spiritual torment of why, and the anger that I felt towards God. And, even though I was angry at God, I never stopped believing in him. And I never stopped trusting that he was going to bring me through. And that's another thing. Just because you're angry at God doesn't mean that you don't believe. I totally believed in God. And when I was in the ICU and when I was in the darkest moments of being in the hospital, hands down, the only thing that would any source of peace and comfort was if my family was singing and if they were reading the Bible, I mean, they would sit for hours and just read scriptures on their phone, just read through 30 Psalms, because that was the only thing in those moments that brought me any comfort. It wasn't the pain medicine, it wasn't, and we need all those things, but you know, God's presence would be the strongest. It would be so strong in my hospital room when family and friends were gathered around and they were singing and they were praying and they were reading scriptures. And even though I had moments that I was so angry, I never doubted him. I never doubted that God was in the midst of everything that was going on. And even though I wasn't encouraged enough to see how God was going to use it, fast forward, God did use it. And as we begin to go through the recovery process, and we went through counseling, we went through therapy, and we went through all these things, God began laying on my heart, like, I just want you to share. And I really questioned that because social media can be a really negative place. And sometimes social media is something that we sometimes maybe need to take a break from. But God can also use it in positive ways, and He has. And at first, when God started laying that on my heart, like I needed to share on social media and all these things, I kind of questioned it at first because I was like, is God really telling me to use social media? Like, is He really telling me to get on Facebook? Like, am I sure that I'm hearing this right? But I just kept praying about it. And I talked to Kevin and I talked to my parents, and everybody was just so encouraging. And they were like, if you feel that, if God has laid that on your heart, then you need to do it. You just need to follow, just lean into that. And so with all their encouragement, that's what I began to do. I just began to share and talk, make posts on social media. That because of the Lord, we had gained such a following for our story, and that really has just blossomed into something that I literally, in my wildest imaginations, I could have never even dreamed.
It's already hard to show up on social media no matter what. I feel like as a woman, we feel like we need to look a certain way, we need to speak a certain way, we need to do things a certain way. And it's hard to just show up as ourselves, even if, we feel a tugging to do that. You showing up on social media it's a whole different realm, and it's a whole different world of showing up as someone that you're not used to being. And so you showing up had to have been hard, even though for anyone it's hard.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'll kind of backtrack a little bit to go along with what you're saying, but I remember coming home from the hospital when I finally got discharged from the rehab hospital. We had about a 4.5 hour drive to make. So we had to go from Shreveport, Bossier area, which is in North Louisiana, back to Gonzales, Prairieville, which is a little south of Baton Rouge, which is where we live. And so we were moving in with my parents. And so when I got discharged, we had about a 4.5 hour drive. And it's really crazy, the psychological things that you go through. I was terrified to leave the hospital because, and that sounds crazy because, usually we're like, oh, can't wait to get out of here. And part of me was excited to get out, but it's like I had been there so long that had become my norm. And I didn't know how I was going to do life outside of the hospital. I was so used to, on a physical level, I was so used to having medical staff and medical personnel at my beck and call 24/7. And it had been that way for almost 6 months. Now, that does not mean that my family wasn't there all the time, that they didn't work super hard and help me with so many things. They did. They worked, in some cases, in the rehab hospital especially, they worked just as hard as the nurses did. But I remember on that drive home, we had to stop halfway, and the doctors had told me, like, you have to stop halfway and you have to get out and you need to walk around a little bit, trying to prevent blood clots and all this stuff. So we stopped halfway at a gas station, and I just remember like the fear that I had to even step out of the vehicle was astronomical because I didn't want people to see me. I had bandages everywhere. I still had open wounds. I mean, in our own minds, I looked horrible. And so I remember not anticipating that, but being stricken by so much fear that I didn't want anybody to see me. I didn't even want to get out of the car in the parking lot of a gas station. There were so many things. So we pulled over and we got out, and to just ease my fears, my dad pulled to the back of the gas station, and thankfully it was in the evening time. And so they gently prodded me out of the car, and we just kind of walked a little bit at the back of the gas station, where nobody could see me. But I remember just being so terrified. Like, if anyone sees me, they're gonna run and scream, in the opposite direction. Like, I look so scary. And that fear went on for a long time. I mean, thankfully, to my advantage in that situation, when we did finally get home, I didn't leave the house much because physically I just couldn't handle it. Like, I was in so much pain, like open wounds and all that. It wasn't really a possibility for me to leave the house for quite some time, several months probably. And I remember I longed to go back to church. At this point, it had been 6 months, it's been 7 months since I'd been in a church service. We had watched live streams. We had been a part of services that way. And I'm so thankful for that. So thankful for that. But, you just long to be with the body, just in the presence of God. And spiritually, I longed for that, but so scared. Like, it was such a hard thing for me to go to church for the first time, to the people that I loved so dearly, like they were my own family. And most all of them had traveled and had come to the hospital and had come to see me. So they knew what I looked like. We'd already crossed that threshold, that boundary, but just something psychologically about it. It was such a wall to get over. It was such a barrier. And just everything, doing everything in public for the first time, going into a gas station for the first time, going into a restaurant for the first time. Like, every single thing was such a psychological thing to go through, because people would look, people would stare, kids would stare and point, some kids would cry. I mean, it happened, and that was my nightmare, and they happened. And I got through it, and so showing up online was kind of the same thing. Even though it's a lot easier to like show up online in some ways, like sending a text is way easier than like saying something to somebody in person. But with the online component, it was so many more people, and it was people all over the world, and it was totally public. Like anybody in the world, if they wanted to look you up, boom, bam, there you were. There was all your stuff. There was everything. And so showing up online was so hard. Again, it was like another psychological barrier that I had to cross. And when I look back on that, I just see the hand of the Lord, because I know it was the Lord who just gently led me through all of those barriers, just gently called me to the other side and just, prodded me that you can do it. You can't, it is okay. And as I began posting and sharing online, and at the same time, I was going out in public a little bit more and doing a little bit here and there. And as all of those things were simultaneously happening, what happened is God turned all that for good. And I started to get confidence. And I just started to think, like, it's really hard. And I struggle so much with the way that I look. Women, we struggle with that anyway. We struggle with that. I struggled with that before the accident. I didn't like this about myself, and I didn't like that. We all have that. And so I still struggle with that sometimes. I still sometimes look in the mirror and I'm just like, I can't believe this is what I look like. But at the same time, with God and his presence and his power and his mercy and his grace, and with my family and with Kevin and with this whole community around me, just encouraging me so much. I mean, that really just gave me the confidence that I needed to keep sharing online and to keep, showing up in person. And it's been a very slow progress. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't get confidence overnight, but it's little by little and step by step. And all of these things it gave me the confidence to be like, you know what? This is who I am, and this is where I am at. And I felt like God led me here. He led me to this path. He led me to share. And if that's what God's calling me to do, then that's what I have to do. In my opinion, I don't have any other option. If that's what God has for me, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to show up for. And as the years have gone by, this coming July will be 4 years since the accident happened, which seems crazy. And as the years have gone by, anytime I go somewhere, I meet people, whether it's in my hometown, whether it's somewhere else. We've been all over the place, and people come up to us randomly in a store, in a restaurant, and they're like, I know you don't know me, but I know you, and I've been following you, and I've prayed for you. And on the beach, we met people on the beach last year. Like, God has just orchestrated this crazy thing that we could have never, ever imagined. And to have people come up to me repeatedly and say, like, you have given me confidence, and just all of these things, like, I don't feel worthy of that at all. That I don't bring that up to brag on myself at all. I feel like I am a normal person, just like everybody else. But all of these people telling me different things, that has given me confidence, and that has helped me to grow, and that has helped me to just know, like, it's just given me confirmation that this is part of what God has wanted to do. And I'm just so thankful that I leaned into that, and I'm so thankful that God gave me the courage. And I'm thankful for my family and for Kevin for encouraging me and always supporting me and always saying, like, we have your back, like, you can do this. God's kingdom is so cool because it's such a beautiful relationship, because, as God has led me to share online, and it's helped other people, when those people can come up to me and share with me, that helps me, and that increases my confidence. And this is for a reason, and this is for a purpose, and God is putting together something that is just so incredible. I don't even think that, Kevin and I can't even wrap our minds around what all God has in store.
Saying that reminds me that, God confidence is a whole different level of confidence. And that's exactly
Yeah.
what you have shown. And I think it's one reason why your story has inspired so many. It's one thing to have a tragic accident, but it's another thing whenever you allow God to take tragedy and turn it into a purpose and a calling and into a message. And that's what you've done. You've allowed your tragedy to become a message, and you haven't been afraid to preach it and to show up and to show it and allow God to use you. It's amazing to watch. It's inspiring and it's empowering other women, which is pretty much the whole point of Unashamedly You, is to encourage and to empower women to go after what God's calling them to do. No, our calling doesn't all look the same. No, our hardships are not all the same. No, our purpose is not all the same. But whatever God is calling you to do, whenever you stand up and you do it and you allow Him to take control, that's whenever He can, like you said, blow your mind. You can't even wrap your mind around what God can really do with things in our lives.
It's so true, especially if people are not necessarily in the apostolic or Pentecostal movement. Commonly, they ask me, like, "Man, you're so strong. Like, how have you been able to go through all of this?" Like, and they'll just kind of ask me, like, how? And my response is always, it was God. I mean, how else would I have gotten through that? I'm not a superhuman. Nobody's superhuman. I feel like I had a strong foundation because of my family, and we were all so close, and I love my parents and my sisters to death, and we have such a close relationship and such a foundation. And I'm a fourth generation Pentecostal, and that's a huge foundation. That's a legacy. That's a heritage. That's a godly heritage. And Kevin is third generation on one side of his family, and with Kevin and how sweet and caring and kind he is, and how he's just the person that God made for me. Like between God and my husband and my family, like I had no choice but to come through. I had no choice but to be an overcomer. And so I like when people ask me that question, because I get to share, like, this is how good our God, this is how he can bring us through so much pain and trauma and tragedy. And he can blow our minds, and he gives us the strength. He gives us the grace that we need every day. The Bible says his grace is sufficient, and it's sufficient for each day. And so when people ask me that, I love for them to ask me that, because I get to share with them, and I get to say, like, that's how good our God is. We can believe him for the miraculous. We can believe him for miracles. He's not done doing miracles, clearly. And so I love when people say that, because just so true.
Well, I know that you said you needed encouragement and you needed those things to get through those hard times. But thank you so much for being on this podcast today, because I know that you've brought encouragement to others. You're turning around and getting that encouragement that it took for you to make it through those dark times. And someone else may be listening to this and you're going through a dark time, but allow this story to encourage you that God's not done. The story's not over. There's still more to be written. And I know that, like you said at the beginning, you had the thoughts of how you thought your life would go in the fairy tale, but the fairy tale's not over. God is still working. He's still writing. He's still creating. And when we know that he holds the pen, what trust we can have. We can have so much trust in him. And I'm so thankful that you hopped on here today to share this with us. And you also have a special announcement for our podcast listeners.
I am so, so thankful and honored that you would have me. I always feel honored and so humbled. And, I just want God to get all the glory, because he's the only person that deserves it. And yes, I have a special announcement, ladies. I am very excited, and I will see you all at the Unashamedly You conference this year in September. And I can't wait to be with you all at this conference. I know it's going to be amazing.
We are so excited, you guys. Medley is going to be coming, and she's going to be speaking. You're going to get to see her in person and get to meet her in person. And I know that not only have you been encouraged today and by listening to this podcast, but don't miss out in September so that you can have more encouragement and meet this inspiring lady in person. We cannot wait to see you all there. So now you know not just one, but two of our speakers that's going to be there for the Unashamedly You conference. You guys, don't forget, go and share this podcast to your social media right now. Tag us that you've listened, and you're going to be entered for a chance to come for free. We are so excited to meet you all and cannot wait to get you all in the same room together. Now go be unashamedly you.